What you're witnessing out here on LA's Skid Row is horrifying. A woman deathly ill, drugged out on fentanyl, a nearly comatose skeleton trying to survive on the street, an all too common occurrence here in Los Angeles with the homeless population. I was unnerved. The person I'm interviewing was not. He's seen this all before.
Well, she needs some water. She needs something. You can't leave her like that.
Withdrawal. She's in fentanyl withdrawal. She needs an ambulance.
What's going on here?
She's in withdrawal from fentanyl. And the withdrawals are absolutely debilitating. And so she's lying there on the floor. She's thirsty. She wants water.
Can you have your office bring some water for her, please? Now?
Yeah, I'll get her water. They got water in the machine right there for brother.
We'll get water.
Water. But the ambulance is going to come. And hopefully what they'll do is they can get her on some methadone or Suboxone to help level her out. But if she returns right back here to the street, she's going to go right back to using again. That's the problem.
She needs some medical help right now.
Yeah, and she not only needs medical help, she needs intervention.
Right. Is that 911?
Yes, sir. I'm on the phone with 911 right now.
Okay, they're going to send someone?
Yes, sir.
Can someone get her some water?
I have an officer on the way.
Thank you so much.
Look, this is the tragedy of addiction. When I was on the street, you get to a certain point when you're so deep into your addiction that it's no longer about getting high anymore. It's about not getting dope sick. And that's what she is right now. She's in withdrawal from fentanyl. And it's the worst possible feeling. I feel bad talking to you about this right now because I want to help her. And so we've done what we can. We're bringing her water. We call 911 to try to help her out. And hopefully
what else can we do for her while we're here right now? Is that the 911, the ambulance?
That's pretty much, unless you want to go buy her some fentanyl and give it to her, because that's what she actually needs. That's what her body's craving for. And that is not going to solve a problem. It's a short-term fix in that she'll stop being in withdrawal, but she'll be right back into the situation again, and 2 hours later she'll be in withdrawal again because you have to use fentanyl so frequently. So what the paramedics should be doing if they take her to the hospital is they'll get her on buprenorphine or Suboxone to stop the withdrawals. That will help. But then they're going to release her from the hospital, and she's going to be released right back out here to the street where she's going to continue to use because they don't have enough shelter beds. They don't have enough treatment. There's no modicum to force her into drug treatment, which is what she really needs to get clean and get out of the situation. Instead, everything is harm reduction, and everything is just, you can thank the harm reductionists and the ACLU. I'm sorry to say it. Look, I'm a Democrat. I feel bad to say it, but it's true. The whole argument around body autonomy is nihilistic. We have an obligation as a community to intervene in these situations beyond just calling 911, which again is a short-term fix because there's nowhere for her to go. And so we just get stuck in this perpetual cycle of this poor woman cycling in and out of addiction and in and out of homelessness because the city, the state, our country refuses to change its policy, invest in recovery and treatment for people, and make the tough political decisions that are required to intervene upon someone like that.
Is there a possible solution to this drug crisis? A solution for this woman strung out on fentanyl, a crisis plaguing thousands of LA homeless, an epidemic destroying tens of thousands of lives in Los Angeles, the Bay Area, Seattle, Portland, and beyond.
Well, first you have to stop with the permissive harm reduction policies that help get us into this mess. The argument from harm reduction folks is that we're keeping people alive. But to what end? That, technically she's alive. You think that that's a good quality of life for that person?
How does Tom Wolfe know exactly what's going on out here on these streets? How does he know what's going on with this homeless woman? Well, her tragic story begins with his tragic story. About 10 years ago, Tom had surgery and got hooked on pain pills. He was married, had 2 kids, was a child support officer, a Bay Area government employee, making a good living, had a great life. However, Tom began purchasing oxycodone on the street to support his habit after surgery. He spent $100,000 on pills over the next year, stopped paying the mortgage, hid all the debt from his wife, and then Tom switched to heroin. He became an IV drug user, lost his job, was unemployed. His wife gave him an ultimatum: get treatment or get out of the house. Tom chose to leave the house, abandon his family, keep using drugs. Eventually, Tom was homeless with nothing to his name, now surviving on the streets. He committed crimes to maintain his addiction. Got arrested 6 times in 3 months for being a drug mule. Tom was the worst of the worst. A criminal, a drug addict who worked for the drug dealers. So Tom just doesn't talk the talk these days, he walks the walk. Today, a decade later, miraculously, he is now a nationally recognized recovery expert. He says the current homeless policies are what's destabilizing and destroying every West Coast city.
Policy should be that we build out what they call a continuum of care. It starts with stabilization, then goes to detox, then residential treatment, transitional housing with job training, and then fully independent living. She would benefit from going to a stabilization center or a hospital to determine her medical needs, and then from there, not being given the choice, being put into detox with methadone or buprenorphine in possibly a locked facility for a period of time. So we're not just talking about keeping people alive, we're talking about changing people's lives, and you do that with recovery and treatment. And so we as a community, as a state, as a city, LA needs to fund drug treatment and then change their policies on actually mandating people into treatment. It's what's destabilizing all of these cities. It's that you've got thousands upon thousands of people like this out on the street. It not only creates blight, it's not only bad for them and unhealthy for them, but it puts a strain on our systems, right? How many ambulance calls do they take a day to respond to someone who's in withdrawal or somebody who's overdosed or somebody in a meth-induced psychosis? It's not a sustainable model. And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on it. And look, the bottom line is that drugs aren't free. People forget that. And the government certainly isn't going to get into the business of giving drugs away. They tried that in the 90s with the OxyContin problem with overprescribing. That didn't work out so good. So what we need to do is get this person off of drugs and get them help. I know that this is difficult. It's a difficult problem to solve. But building $1 million per unit housing units where people can use drugs inside is not going to solve her problem. What's going to solve her problem is treatment and recovery, getting her off of the drugs. And people say, oh, you know, she has to be willing to do that. Baloney. I was given a choice to either sit in jail or go to treatment, and I chose treatment, and it changed my life. That works for a lot of people.
For the record, I've been repeatedly emailing the office of Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass over the last few years to talk with her about this homeless crisis. No reply. They refused to speak with me, let alone answer my many emails or phone messages. Mayor Bass claims the homeless problem out here is getting better. Where? How? I get there are various programs like the mayor's Inside Safe. Kudos for that. And to be fair, the mayor and county officials are taking some homeless folks off the streets. However, let's just be honest here, the LA homeless crisis is the worst it's ever been. For every homeless person the city and county find shelter for or services for, so many more make their way out to all of these streets out here. So many of these homeless get imprisoned with the drugs, with the fentanyl. So something is very wrong with homeless policy here in LA and throughout the state of California. And the city and county and the state of California just keep repeating these same failed policies. And even if a few homeless encampments are taken apart, new ones are out here days or weeks later, as I said. So how are things getting better? Can someone explain?
Housing first is not the answer. People are not only promoting, they've been adamant that that is the only way to go. A very expensive, slow to develop, failed model.
For years, Reverend Andy Bales was a familiar name in Los Angeles. Reverend Bales led LA's Union Rescue Mission. He was hailed a hero among the homeless population, a hero from some Los Angeles city and county leaders. Andy also served as a commissioner of LAHSA, the Los Angeles Housing Services Authority. LAHSA is a city-county partnership, the same agency that claimed in 2024 the LA homeless crisis was improving, even though no LA resident, no LA business owner, no homeless expert we interviewed believed that. And even though these Los Angeles streets tell a completely different story, with tens of thousands of homeless people out here living on 50 square blocks of cement, that is LA's Skid Row. Reverend Bales' hero status kind of changed over the years as he began speaking out about the neglect and lack of responsibility and accountability on the part of the LA city and county leaders where homelessness was concerned.
Well, I can tell you cartels dumped very inexpensive meth on Skid Row, destroyed so many mines with that. And I guess they didn't make enough profits, so they hired a genius. They called him the Brain, and he added fentanyl to the meth. And now on Skid Row, we have a deadly meth-fentanyl mixture. 6 precious human beings die every day because we have believed in a housing first, free flow of drugs, let the gangs rule, hands-off approach.
So how do you attack this fentanyl drug crisis in the homeless population here? How do you fight back against this?
Well, you don't cooperate with the drug cartels. Every time the county or city hands out a crack pipe to help somebody continue in their addiction, they're enabling that person to destroy themselves, to destroy their lives, and they are subsidizing the cartel's profits, and they need to be called out for it. You cannot be an enabler.
Easy to say, obviously. How do you stop the homeless folks out here from doing drugs? They're addicted, they'll have massive withdrawal, they have serious psychosis, schizophrenia, mental health issues, and it's their fix, it's their habit.
Yeah, but the answer is not letting them suffer more, add more trauma to their lives, live in a hell-like environment with no hope. The answer is to reach out and have an immediate open bed for anybody who seeks to come in under a roof and begin a journey back to recovery, sobriety, and productivity. And we in LA have never offered that, and we continue down a road of putting all the permanent supportive housing in one area. Experts will tell you, if you put everybody that needs help, mental help or addiction help or trauma recovery help, if you put all of those folks in one area, you've just destroyed that area. This needs to be a healthy neighborhood, not a neighborhood of only troubled people. And yet they continue to build towers even of housing first apartments where there's a free flow of drugs.
Possibly Reverend Bales cared too much. He lost both his legs, the victim of too much compassion for the homeless, if there can be such a thing as too much empathy.
I've stopped pipe fights. I've stopped. Sometimes I spent the night on the streets. I've stopped one night 5 rapes, men attacking women. That's normal on Skid Row. I lost my legs because I had a wound that was almost healed, and I was wearing a wound boot, and I delivered 2,000 bottles of cold water on a very hot day on Skid Row, and I came in contact with human waste. And I have lost my 2 legs, but we haven't done enough. We're not doing enough.
You lost your legs trying to help others.
Yes. Yep. And that's okay with me if something good comes of it. But what has to happen? What has to happen in LA to get people to actually do something about it?
And it got to a point where the city really had no kind of proactive plan to address homelessness. It was just reacting to lawsuit after lawsuit.
Elizabeth Mitchell is chief legal counsel for the organization LA Alliance for Human Rights. Elizabeth and the Alliance have repeatedly sued the city and county, in part over their failure to comprehensively deal with the homeless crisis, and for not honoring various settlement agreements to take homeless folks off these streets. A crisis that has now taken over the streets everywhere from Skid Row in downtown LA to West Los Angeles, Santa Monica, the South Bay, and beyond. Elizabeth agrees that the fentanyl and drug crisis is overtaking the homeless population, and this must be a priority. However, she also says that as the city and county of LA contribute to the homeless crisis, all this must change.
It's unbelievable. The number of government officials that have been indicted or investigated in the last several years really is shocking. And you have that, you have homelessness, you have really these two major crises, and people have lost faith in their institutions, and rightfully so. I mean, we've had audits that have come out recently of LAHSA, of the county, of the city. We're expecting a major one in this lawsuit, and what it's seeing is massive financial mismanagement, potentially even theft. It's shocking. I mean, you're looking at like a sidewalk that didn't even look like this a few months ago. Honestly, it's actually getting worse in Skid Row, which I didn't know was possible. I mean, people that are living in extreme poverty in the name of compassion to just let people die here is absolutely shocking.
Elizabeth says that while the city and county's mismanagement of the homeless crisis is egregious, what's worse these days is the drug crisis that's now permeating most of LA's homeless population.
90% of the people here are addicted to drugs. It is such a major problem. You have fires, you literally, I'm looking right now at a remains of a fire here, remains of a fire here, and I saw another one right over there, all lit by people who were likely on drugs. I mean, people say they're warming themselves, which sometimes is true, but not in the middle of the street, right? Oftentimes there's a link between meth use and setting fires. Recently, we saw huge fires and massive devastation in Los Angeles, and people are frustrated at the inept response of our government. You layer that crisis on top of the homelessness crisis. I mean, people here are already at the bottom of the totem pole. How much worse is it going to get? And to have people out on the streets where it is unsafe and unhealthy, they're either lighting fires to cook things to keep themselves warm, or often because they're just on drugs, and you're letting that to sit in a place where we just had massive devastation. I mean, what a terrible idea. Why are people on the streets in the first place, right? Nobody should be allowed to or have to live on the streets of Los Angeles, in one of the wealthiest cities in our nation. It is unbelievable.
Why has the city and county failed so miserably in trying to fix this homeless pandemic? I say pandemic.
I could give you reason after reason. I think so much of it is sort of political correctness. I think there's this concept that we don't want to criminalize homelessness, right? But nobody is criminalizing poverty or criminalizing homelessness. It is criminalizing the criminals, right? You have a vicious population who is preying on the weakest of us here, and we're letting that happen. Nobody is addressing that issue, right? Nobody is taking people off of the street to address their underlying like narcotic behaviors, their addictions, right? The mental illness. We're just letting people stay here, letting people die and suffer in the name of compassion. And it's this talk track that has to end. Certainly, there are people who have become homeless because they have lost a job, because they have lost their rent, because of some significant medical bills. That definitely exists. But you stay on these streets for more than a couple weeks, you're likely turning to narcotics to deal with the trauma of that. You have this permissive policies that are letting it happen. You certainly have a massive drug and gang culture here, particularly in Skid Row, where we have, right? Gangs actually make truces. It's the only place in the world where, what do they say, red and blue makes green, here in Skid Row, right? Where gangs actually have truces and they divvy up the blocks, right? There's so much gang and narcotics activity, and we're letting it happen, and as I said, in the name of compassion, because of these permissive policies. It has got to change.
There are even more tents than the last time you were here. And part of that, a lot of it, has to do with fentanyl. We have a whole new population of individuals that are arrived in our area.
Los Angeles businessman Sergio Moreno says the fentanyl and drugs that are flooding these streets are bringing more homeless people here every month. Sergio owns this check-cashing store on Skid Row. This was not today's Skid Row 40 years ago, when Sergio's father, an immigrant from Mexico, purchased the property and business in 1983. Now, some 4 decades later, Sergio says this 7th Street downtown neighborhood is a third world country.
Fentanyl and other drugs are so readily available. Enforcement is practically non-existent. And on top of that, we're also ground zero for the harm reduction, unfortunately. And for those of you that don't know what the harm reduction is, we have a vehicle that's funded, it belongs to a nonprofit that's funded by LA County, and they go around passing out drug paraphernalia. A lot of people with common sense would say, wait, you're enabling their drug usage. Basically, I see it as you're going to end up allowing these people to even die more quickly. I see the same individuals on the street, constant cycle. And eventually, they end up passing away. We just had a fellow who camped out there, older gentleman, senior citizen. Just one morning, he was alive at midnight and just died according to the coroner, showed up, it was an overdose.
I know you told me when we were interviewing you a few months ago that you see death out here every day.
Death is normal out here. A few years ago, we had an average of 3 people die on the sidewalks here. Now it's up to 6. 6 human beings each and every day are dying. Most of them, obviously there's violence, drugs, but the fentanyl is just, I think, added that extra oomph to exponentially increase that. I mean, you're doubling from 3 to 6. It's like, wow, it's so readily available. It's a pharmacy out here, and they mix it with other drugs. And so people build up their tolerance, and it's a vicious cycle, and we see it, and we see ODs every day.
Estela Lopez is the executive director of the Los Angeles Downtown Industrial Business Improvement District. Estela and the BID provide advocacy and services for business and property owners like Sergio Moreno. Today, the BID advocates for this 64-block area of about 600 businesses that Estela says are invisible to city and county leaders. Estela's heart breaks with all the suffering out here, and she says something must be done, both for the homeless as well as for the sustainability of Los Angeles and its residents and business owners. For years, Estela has witnessed the horrific tragedy of the homeless crisis out here, which she also insists is getting worse each month, with, in her words, the city and county doing everything wrong to try and fix this disaster.
On a daily basis, we see people having not just the fentanyl itself and the effects of the high, but then the overdose and people rushing to help them with Narcan or calling 911. And we know that it's here, and we know that it's deadly. It's not shielded from view. It's on the public right of way. It's in the public view. But in my position, there's a profound sense of helplessness, because we can, as a community, shout it from the rafters. But the authorities know, and the elected officials know. We're not telling them something they don't know. But then there's no answer, there's no response. It's like the cavalry isn't coming. People being on the street, whatever the reason, how they got there, down on their luck, lost a job, domestic violence. There are a lot of roads that lead people to get to the street, but once they're here, if they already don't have an addiction problem, they'll get one very quickly. So we now have how many billions of dollars coming from the feds, from the state and the county and the city. And yet over the last decade, when those funds have been greater than ever, and where voters have taxed themselves to add even more funding, during the last decade, the number of people on the street hasn't declined as a result of that funding. It has exploded. So, if you're a fentanyl dealer, a meth dealer, if you make your living by making people addicted and keeping them there, you've just hit the gold mine, because the target rich population for narcotics, all types of substances, is living freely on the sidewalks of Los Angeles with no guardrails, no rules. It is an accepted part of Los Angeles now. To call it a 24/7 drug bazaar is exactly what it is, because even when night falls here, we have had a lot of our members share videos with us of what goes on here at night. And for those who believe that narcotics is a, somewhat victimless crime, I mean, if a person's addicted and that's where they're at and that's what they need in order to, but the criminality that springs up around it, first of all, folks who are addicted become victims, not just of their own addiction, but of those who keep them addicted. They have to turn to criminality in order to support their habit.
You can either go to treatment or you can keep sitting in jail. And so I opted to go to treatment. And the next day, my brother bailed me out, dropped me off at the Salvation Army in San Francisco, which was a 6-month residential treatment program. And I started my journey in recovery, and 6.5 years later now I'm clean and sober.
This was nothing less than a miracle, in my humble opinion. How did that miracle happen? How do you go from the worst of the worst, living in the gutter, let's be honest, to being one of the most renowned recovery advocates in the United States?
Well, first of all, you have to have something to live for. And so I have a wife and kids. I had something to live for, but more importantly, I valued my own life, and that I didn't want to be that person. My life wasn't over at 48. And as my head cleared from all the drugs, I started to realize that there's more in my life, and going back to the street and using drugs, I'm never going to find out what that is. So I decided to give recovery an honest try.
There is no city that leaves people on the street like LA. There's no county that leaves people on the streets. 50,000, that's maybe 5-10 times more than any other city. I am absolutely broken-hearted and frustrated, sad, and I'm disappointed that I really thought we could turn things around if everybody worked together. And so I'm disappointed even in myself for not doing a better job.
Reverend Andy Bales is a hero, that's for certain. No blame there. I'm going to continue to contact Mayor Bass's office, the state of California, to try and get some answers. I hope to eventually get an interview. Thank you to all the folks that helped us for this special homeless report. We're going to have more on our series later this year. Thanks for joining us.